We are joined by the Phil Steele from philsteele.com. Phil, good morning, sir. How are you?
I am doing great, David. How about yourself today?
Doing wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk about where everybody can get the magazine.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, this year, unlike past years, you can only get it at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. Those are the two brick-and-mortar stores it's available at. So once again, don't waste your gas driving around looking for it. It's at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, or you could go online at philsteele.com. And when you go to philsteele.com, you can order the hard copy there. And if you order the hard copy, we give you the digital magazine for free. So Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or philsteele.com.
Well, let's start things off with A&M, because I know that you had a conversation not too long ago with Mike Elko, and you learned a lot about where they're going. Just talk to me a little bit about what you learned about Mike and just the direction of the program.
Well, first of all, great respect for what Coach Elko did at Duke. Two amazing seasons that far surpassed my expectations both years, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think out of the entire conversation I had with Coach Elko, the thing that stood out to me was he said this had the chance to be the best defense he has coached. And I'm like, has coached, not just at Duke, but overall. And remember, back in 2021, they only allowed 15.9 points per game here at Texas A&M. It's a dominant defensive front coming in. The offensive line will be improved. If they keep Connor Wegman healthy, the quarterback is probably the key for them to operate the highest levels. They've got four really good running backs that they have. And the biggest question mark on offense might be the wide receivers, but they have the talent there. So if they can come along, that'll help out Wegman. But an improved offensive line, better running backs, and the defense, look out.
Well, he told you, and I read this morning as I was getting ready for it, that they're not going to be one of the top offensive lines in the SEC, but one of the most improved. That is such a key part of the issues the last 3 years. If they can have, better than middle-of-the-road offensive line, what kind of future does Connor Wegman have with that kind of support?
I think it's huge. And, he did mention that the offensive line was a weakness last year, and as you just touched on, told me that they would not be the best, but middle of the road, and that it would be a big step up. And you go back to last year, I thought there were games where sort of running for his life. I know they only allowed 30 sacks, but, we went through, 4 or 5 quarterbacks last year, it seemed at times, and it was trouble. So I think having the improved offensive line is really going to help the offense overall and help keep Connor Wegman healthy.
Phil, how do you see Nick Scorton his game translating to the SEC?
He was dominant in the Big Ten. The Big Ten and the SEC are very close. I think those are the two elite conferences in college football, so he's played against a lot of the big boys. And keep in mind, he was basically the star of that Purdue defense last year. He didn't have the surrounding talent that he's got here at Texas A&M. So I would imagine that last year with Purdue, if you're game planning for Purdue, you're trying to figure out how to stop Scorton, and now you can't do that with this defensive line because there's just so many guys that can cause havoc.
Yeah, we're talking to Phil Steele here on TexAgs Radio. Let's talk a little bit about the linebacker corps, because Torian York was huge for A&M last year. They bring in a couple guys. Solomon DeShields is a guy they picked up from Pitt. Just when you look at this group, this linebacker group, not having Edge Cooper hurts, but they've done a nice job adding to it.
Yeah, they did. And I do like the pickups because, Coach Elko thought that the biggest question mark he had was at the weak side linebacker spot. Bringing in the DeShields from Pitt, I think, was a big-time addition. I had him fourth-team ACC last year. Bringing in a Scooby Williams coming in from Florida, another big-time addition, very productive player. And, of course, having Torian York back is huge, a captain on the team. And so I'm not calling the linebacker unit elite, but I do think they will be very solid this year.
Where do you see Notre Dame? Because I look at their schedule, I look at their talent, and I think they're a team that's destined for the playoffs. And, A&M might be one of their biggest matchups of the year.
Yeah, in fact, it's the only game of the year that I do not have Notre Dame favored. I've got the game of toss-up because it's in College Station. It's early in the year. I do think Notre Dame makes the playoff this year. They've got Riley Leonard at quarterback. who, of course, Coach Elko is very familiar with his strengths and weaknesses, having been his quarterback the last 2 years. They're solid on the defense across the board, and Freeman knows defense. They've got my number 6 set of defensive backs, number 11 defensive line. They're solid on special teams. I rate them number 16 there. They had in a Mitch Jeter at kicker from South Carolina. I really like that addition. And then offensively, strong in all 4 units. So this is a very talented Notre Dame team, one that I do think makes the playoff. But the only game I don't have them favored in this year, and they play the number 57 schedule, is the opening game in College Station.
Let's talk about another team A&M plays early on that it's easy to discount Florida because of their schedule. But when A&M plays them in week 3, it could be a very worrisome game. How do you see Florida, at least from a talent perspective?
Florida's going to surprise some folks this year. And going over the team with Coach Napier, and he's very confident in them. Says, they do have the toughest schedule in the country, but he feels at the end of the season you're going to look at it and say, oh, okay, that wasn't as tough. And this game's in the Swamp. Florida's a tough team in the Swamp. Remember last year they beat Tennessee, number 11 in the country, in the Swamp, and had a lot of good games. The Florida State game, they took the Gators to the wire, or the Seminoles to the wire. They've got Graham Mertz at quarterback, and they add in DJ Lagway behind them. Lagway's a physically gifted quarterback that's a true freshman, gives him a different advantage at the quarterback spot. Montrell Johnson at running back is there, and the defense is going to be much improved over last year. So that's a dangerous game for Texas A&M.
I look at Missouri's schedule, and I'm like, they should stumble into the playoffs. They get A&M there mid-season. Just your thoughts on Missouri this year?
I actually have A&M favored in that game against Missouri. Missouri, you look at them offensively, they are very solid this year. They've got their quarterback back. And remember last year they entered the season, Brady Cook was battling for the starting job, won it in the opener, and then had a really good year. They lose their star running back in Cody Schrader, but bring in a couple of 1,000-yard guys in Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll. They've got one of the best receiving rooms in the country and a veteran offensive line. But they lose their defensive coordinator. They lose 5 NFL draft picks off that defense, and they've got 43 new players on this year's squad. So defense would be a bit of a question mark. I've got A&M a 6-point favorite in that game when Missouri travels there.
I have another team that I expect good things from because the program that they are, but yet I don't know what to think of LSU because of their defense. And also, the offense should be really good, but it's not going to be last year level of really good.
Yeah, you hit it on the head there. First of all, you got to figure LSU's defense is going to be improved, right? I mean, they gave up 417 yards per game last year, 28 points per game, and they've got just too much talent on that side of the ball. And partial of what the offense scored so doggone quick, put them on the field for a lot of plays. But the last time they had a Heisman Trophy quarterback, Joe Burrow, was back in 2019. They averaged 48 points per game. They dropped all the way down to 32 points per game the next year, 16 points per game less. Now, I'm not looking for that big of a drop-off, but I see a drop from 45, maybe by a touchdown, maybe by 10 points this year. They'll be less potent offensively, better defensively, a completely different-looking LSU team. In fact, if you look at the run game, last year Jaden Daniels was their leading rusher, and their running backs only had 280 carries last year. I think this year the running backs get another 100 carries, like 380 carries this year. So a more running back run offense, lower scoring, defense stronger, and they play a lot of games which I rate in the toss-up category this year. I don't really know what to expect from LSU. Yes, I could paint them in as a possible SEC contender. I could also paint them in as an 8 or 9 win team this year.
Let me ask you about Michigan. They look completely different, obviously. Different head coach, different quarterback, offensive line's completely different. The defense should be salty. How do you see them going this year, and what are your thoughts of Texas going there early in the season?
As far as Michigan goes, defensively, I think they have one of the top defenses in the entire country. I rate them number 5. Offensively, good at running back, good at receiver, but you touched on it. Offensive line, all 5 starters gone. And quarterback, I don't care who wins the job, Alex Orji, Davis Warren, Jack Tuttle. You're not looking at elite quarterback play, and you're looking at inexperience and question marks at quarterback. Can Orji throw? Jack Tuttle's a game manager. Davis Warren, we'll see how his game translates. If you have question marks at quarterback and offensive line, generally you're going to struggle. But I've got Michigan losing to Texas. I've got Texas a 7-point favorite in that game. I've got them losing at Ohio State. I think the key as to whether or not they can get back to the playoff would be how quickly the offensive line emerges, the quarterback position, and then the Oregon game on November the 2nd. And I've got that one rated as a toss-up. If they can beat Oregon, I think they have a shot at getting back to the playoff. A 10-win Big Ten team's going to get there. But with that, even though they have one of the best defenses in the country, I'm definitely calling for a step back for Michigan.
And how about Ohio State? Do you see them? They have all the talent. They have a down Michigan team this year. They do have Oregon in the Big Ten. Is Ohio State, do they have a path? Do you see them, as the favorite to get to the championship?
Yeah, I've got them number 2 in the country coming in. I think they do get there. They could lose at Oregon. In fact, here's the interesting thing, David. We may see a couple of times this year, maybe teams meeting 3 times. Maybe Texas and Georgia. I could see a meeting in the regular season, the SEC title, and the playoffs. Same thing with Ohio State and Oregon. Really high on Oregon this year. But the thing you like about Ohio State is that because they've lost to Michigan 3 straight years, they didn't lose their normal 11 draft picks. They only lost 4. A lot of the guys said, I'm not leaving here without beating Michigan. I'm coming back for another year. And you look at them defensive line, they got Sawyer, Hamilton, Tuamola back. In the secondary, they get Burke back. So a lot of guys who could have left for the NFL returned. Then they brought in some great transfers like Caleb Downs from Alabama, Will Howard from Kansas State, Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss at running back. So they really are a very talented team. It wouldn't surprise me if they lost in Autzen Stadium to Oregon, but I think in the long run they win the Big Ten, and it's beat Michigan and advance in the playoffs or bust for Ryan Day, I think.
What is the best case, worst case for Ole Miss this year?
I think Ole Miss can make the playoff. There's no doubt about it. In fact, they're going to open up the season strong. They'll be 6-0 when they travel to face LSU. They've got a ton of talent on offense with Jackson Dart, a deep running back core, some dangerous receivers, veteran offensive line, and the key is going to be defensively. Defensively, they brought in a lot of big-time transfers. Walter Nolan up front on the nose tackle spot, a massive upgrade. And then they bring in the Florida transfer at the jack linebacker position. So I think when you look at Ole Miss, this is by far Lane Kiffin's best team. They're number 13 on my experience chart, and they brought in transfers. The key is going to be at LSU, Georgia at home, at Florida, and then maybe the Oklahoma game at home. How they fare in those will determine whether or not they make the playoff this year.
Phil, let's close out with Alabama, a team that I know they get love still, but it certainly feels like a different level of love now with Kalen DeBoer as the head coach.
Yeah, and I got to be honest with you. When Nick Saban stepped down, a whole bunch of players hit the portal. I was like, oh, maybe it's a rebuilding year for Alabama. But after going over the team with Coach DeBoer, this is a guy that's 104-12 as a head coach. And I went over the Washington team with him in depth last year. I went over this year's Alabama team with him in depth. And while they lost some players to the portal, he went and brought in some key players like Damani Jackson at cornerback from USC, Keon Saab from Michigan at safety. They bring in the Lou Groza Award winner, Graham Nicholson at kicker. Barker Brailsford comes in at center from his Joe Moore winning offensive line that he had at Washington last year. I think that cures the snap problems. They've got Jalen Milroe back. And after finishing up the conversation, I actually feel he's got more talent with Alabama this year than he had at Washington last year, and he got Washington in the national title game. So I'm not discounting his chances of Alabama contending for the SEC title or a national title this year.
Phil, great stuff as always, my friend. Thanks so much. PhilSteele.com is the website. And again, you can pick up the magazine only 2 places, and those are, again?
Barnes & Noble and Books A Million.
Phil, appreciate you, sir. Talk to you soon.
Hey, a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.